Here's the kicker. For these reasons, gold and silver, which are amongst the most scarce of things, have been by all the nations that we know anything of used as money. Sunday, June 5th, 2022, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today, I thought it would be interesting to go back over 200 years to an individual called Willaim Cobbett to explain what's going on with prices, with the currency. We're told that it's inflation. I would say it's more the currency that is depreciating, and that's reflected, of course, in higher prices. And Willaim Cobbett was a really interesting character, and it's appropriate that we're talking about that, especially when we see London pubs, according to the FT, charging as much as £8 for a pint of beer. Willaim Cobbett was originally from Farnham in Surrey, and I think his family kept a pub in Surrey in the early 1800s, and it's still there. It's called now the Willaim Cobbett. So I thought it was really appropriate to look into that. But he called it the grand cause of our miseries, the bank and paper money. By the bank, of course, he means the Bank of England or the central bank. So we're going to go through Wikipedia, and I have to say I've gone through his Wikipedia entry, and a lot of it is not really truthful, I would say. So I would take it with a big pinch of salt, but there are some things that are factual. The best way to learn about him would be to get this book, I would say. So Willaim Cobbett, he was born in 1763, died in 1835. It says here he was an English pamphleteer, journalist, politician, and farmer, born in Farnham, Surrey, one of a popular agrarian faction seeking to reform Parliament, abolish rotten boroughs, restrain foreign activity, and raise wages, to bring peace and ease poverty among farm laborers and smallholders. He backed lower taxes, saving, reversing commons exclosures, and resisting the 1821 gold standard. So it sounds like he was against gold and silver, for that matter, but he wasn't. He was completely against paper money. The reason he was against the 1821 gold standard is because since 1797, the UK had suspended all the payments in gold and silver, and you could only use paper money because of the Napoleonic Wars. And they issued a lot of paper money, not backed. There was a lot of debt issued, and they wanted to go back to the same rate prior to the Napoleonic Wars, prior to 1797. And he said that was wrong. He actually says it in these letters that the only way to go back at the same rate would be to destroy a lot of the paper money, or extinguish a lot of the debt. So he wrote these letters, and I'll talk about that here right now. When he was in prison, why was he in prison? Well, basically because King George III didn't like what he wrote and considered it treasonous libel and put him in jail at Newgate prison for 2 years. At least, I guess he had the time to write this there. He had to pay like £1,000, which was a lot of money back then, as a fine. So it says here, Cobbett was found guilty of treasonous libel on June 15th, 1810, after objecting in the Register, that's where he wrote, to the flogging at Ely of local militiamen by Hanoverians. So it's interesting that King George III kept German troops in this country, not just in the colonies. So there was like a mutiny, and he was critical about how the militiamen, the Hessian troops reacted, and he was put in jail for that. So you can see he was critical of the establishment. So we're going to go to the letter number 1 that he wrote from Newgate Prison. There is an introduction, but yeah, it's more interesting to go through this because he talks about the grand cause of our miseries, which is the bank and paper money. And you can apply that to the ECB, to the Federal Reserve, any central bank around the world. I'm sure it's not something that is taught, let's say, at the London School of Economics or Cambridge or Oxford or Harvard. I mean, this is a great explanation of how the system works. It's going to take a while, but it's Sunday, and hopefully you've got a bit of time on your hands. So bear with me. So, gentlemen, he's writing to the general public. He wants the public to be informed about what's going on, because he mentions how they make it really complicated for the public to understand these matters. During the last session of Parliament, a committee, that is to say 10 or 12 members of the House of Commons, were appointed to inquire into the cause of the high price of gold bullion, that is, gold not coined, and to take into consideration the state of the circulating medium or money of this country. That's the paper money. This committee have made a report, as they call it, but it is a great book that they have written and have had printed, a book much larger than the whole of the New Testament. Of this report, I intend to enter into an examination. So you see, they do these reports, they're transparent, but they write a huge report or book, like he says, and no one's going to look at that, but he did. And you have recently felt and are still feeling some of the effects of paper money. I think it may not be amiss if upon this occasion I address myself to you. I have introduced myself to you without any ceremony, but before we part, we shall become well acquainted, and I make no doubt that you will understand the distinction between paper money and gold money much too well for it to be in the power of anyone ever again to deceive you, which understanding will, in the times now fast approaching, be of great utility to all those amongst you who may have the means of laying up money or saving, however small the quantity may be. The committee above mentioned, which for brevity's sake I call the Bullion Committee, sent for several persons whom they examined as witnesses touching the matter in question. There was Sir Francis Baring, for instance, the great loan maker, and Goldsmith, the rich Jew, whose name you so often see in the newspapers, where he is stated to give grand dinners to princes and great men. The evidence of these and other money dealers, merchants, the Bullion Committee have had printed, and upon this evidence, as well as upon the report itself, we shall have to make some remarks. The result of the committee's inquiries is, in substance, this: that the high price of gold is occasioned by the low value of the paper money, that the low value of the paper money has been occasioned, as you know, the low value of apples is, by the great abundance of it, that the only way to lower the price of the gold is to raise the value of the paper money, and that the only way to raise the value of the paper money is to make the quantity of it less than it is now. Thus far, as you will clearly see, there was no conjuration required. The fact is that not only do these propositions contain well-known and almost self-evident truths, but these truths have, during the last 2 or 3 years, and especially during the last year, been so frequently stated in print that it was next to impossible that any person in England, able to read, should have been unacquainted with them. So people, at least back then, knew that the law of supply and demand, basically, which is something that people don't seem to want to look at nowadays. But having arrived at the conclusion that in order to raise the value of the paper money, its quantity must be lessened. Having come to this point, the rest of the way was more difficult, for the next object was to point out the means of lessening the quantity of paper money. And this is an object which, in my opinion, will never be effected unless those means include the destruction of the whole mass. Not so, however, think the gentlemen of the Bullion Committee. So this is why he didn't want the gold standard to be reset the way they wanted to. They think, or at least they evidently wish to make others think that it is possible to lessen the quantity of paper money and to cause guineas to come back again and to pass from hand to hand as in former times. They would fain have us believe that this can be done without the total destruction of the paper money. And indeed, they have actually recommended to the House of Commons to pass a law to cause the bank in Threadneedle Street, London, commonly called the Bank of England, to pay its notes in real money at the end of 2 years' time from this time, at the end of 2 years from this time. 2 years is a pretty good lease for people to have of this sort. The bank promises to pay on demand. It does this upon the face of every one of its notes, and therefore, as a remedy for the evil of want of gold, to propose that this bank should begin to pay in 2 years' time in something which I think would not have been offered to the public in any age but this. And even in this age, to any public except the public in this country. And this is an interesting part here, and I've spoken about this before, and he actually mentions it too, which is weird. He says, the notes of the Bank of England bear upon the face of them a promise that the bankers or bank company who issue the notes will pay the notes upon demand. Now, what do you mean by paying a note? Certainly, we do not mean the giving of one for another notes, and that's what the Bank of England tells you now. I've called them and said, what's this promise here on the note? What are you paying me with? And they said, well, you can bring an old note and we'll give you a new note. So they're saying the same thing over 200 years ago, which is amazing. Yet, this is the sort of payment that people get at the Bank of England, and this sort of payment the Bullion Committee does not propose even to begin to put an end to in less than 2 years from this time. Gentlemen, we, the people of this country, have been persuaded to believe many things. We have been persuaded to believe ourselves to be the most thinking people in Europe. But to what purpose do men think unless they arrive at useful knowledge by thinking? To what purpose do men think if they are, after all, their thinking, to be persuaded that a bank which has not paid its promissory notes in gold for 13 years and a half will be able to pay them in gold at the end of 15 years and a half? The quantity of notes having gone on regularly increasing. If men are to be persuaded to believe this, to what purpose do they think? But before I proceed any further in my remarks upon the report of the Bullion Committee, before I proceed to lay before you the exposures now made by the labors of this committee, the facts now become evident through this channel. The confessions now made by these members of the House of Commons. Before I proceed to lay these before you, and to remark upon the remedies proposed by the committee, it will be necessary for me to go back into the history of paper money. So this is the good part here. Because without doing this, I shall be talking to you of things of which you have no clear notion, and the reasonings relating to which you will, of course, not at all understand. It is a great misfortune that any portion of your time should be spent in reading or thinking about matters of this kind. But such is our present situation in this country that every man, and I'll add every woman as well, who has a family to preserve from want, ought to endeavor to make himself or herself, I guess, acquainted with the nature and with the probable consequences of the paper money now afloat. I mean, this is so applicable 212 years later. Money is the representative or the token of property or things of value. The money, while used as money, is of no other use, and therefore a bit of lead or of wood or of leather would be as good as gold or silver to be used as money. But if these materials, which are everywhere found in such abundance, were to be used as money, there would be so much money made that there would be no end of it. And besides, the money made in one country would, however, therefore enforced by law, have no value in any other country. Here's the kicker. For these reasons, gold and silver, which are amongst the most scarce of things, have been by all the nations that we know anything of used as money. While the money of any country consists of nothing but these scarce metals, while it consists of nothing but gold and silver, there is no fear of it becoming too abundant. But if the money of a country be made of lead, tin, wood, leather, or paper, and if anyone can make it, who may choose to make it, there needs no extraordinary wisdom to foresee that there will be a great abundance of this sort of money, and that the gold and silver money, being in fact no longer of any use in such a state of things, will go either into the hoards of the prudent or into the bags of those who have the means of sending or carrying them to those foreign countries where they are wanted and where they will bring their value. That a state of things like that here spoken of does now exist in this country is notorious to all the world. But while we are all acquainted with the fact, and while many of us are most sensibly feeling its effects, scarcely a man amongst us takes the trouble to inquire into the cause. And that's what many people are not doing today, the cause of the depreciation of the currency. People are talking about Putin, the war, COVID, right? They're not talking about the cause, the root cause. Yet, unless the cause be ascertained, how are we to apply or to judge of a remedy? We see the country abounding with paper money. We see every man's hand full of it. We frequently talk of it as a strange thing and a great evil, but never do we inquire into the cause of it. There are few of you who cannot remember the time when there was scarcely even seen a banknote among tradesmen and farmers. I can remember when this was the case, and when the farmers in my country hardly ever saw a banknote except when they sold their hops at Weyhill Fair. People in those days used to carry little bags to put their money in instead of the pasteboard or leather cases that they now carry. If you look back and take a little time to think, you will trace the gradual increase of paper money and the like decrease of gold and silver money. At first, there were no banknotes under £20. The next, they came with £15, the next to £10. And at the beginning of the last year, they came to £5. And before the end of it, they came down to £2 and £1. How long it will be before they come down to parts of a pound? It would take perhaps a difficult day, but in Kent at least, there are country notes in circulation to an amount as low as that of 7 shillings. So there you go. That's the cause of, well, they call it now inflation, but inflation really is the inflation of the paper money, of the currency and the credit. That results, of course, in the loss of value of that paper money or currency, because it becomes very abundant relative to other real things or to real things. And yeah, that's the underlying cause of what he calls our miseries. It's the bank, the central bank, in this case, the Bank of England, and paper money, nothing else. It's not greedy business people. It's not the greedy OPEC. It's not Putin. It's not the Chinese. Yes, unfortunately, nowadays, we've been told that inflation is rising prices. It's all really warped. It's all upside down. I mean, this was before Keynes, and I think Keynes was brought in to discredit people like Willaim Cobbett. So yeah, you can get both of these. I first bought this one, and then one of the viewers sent me this one. So there you go. I'm going to put a link below in the description with the title of the book. You can search for it and buy it. I highly recommend it. The book is called Paper Against Gold, containing the history and mystery of the Bank of England, the funds, the debt, the lowering and the raising of the value of paper money. There's a lot more very significant information he talks about, and I'll probably make another video how the central bank and the national debt go hand in hand, how you can't have one without the other, right? And that's why we're in so much debt as nations nowadays. It's because of central banks, and he talks about that back in 1810, 1811. It's amazing. So if you enjoyed this reading of Willaim Cobbett, this report, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide, and tell all your friends about this, because nowadays, with what we are seeing in terms of the cost of living crisis, it's more important than ever that people learn the root causes, as Willaim Cobbett said, of rising prices, and to make sure that we can remedy this in the future for our children, grandchildren, and their children, so we don't keep coming back to this every 40 years, this inflation or this debasement of currency and the misery that it creates, right? So I wish you all a great rest of the weekend, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.